You don't have enough time. That's the feeling, isn't it? The low grade, constant pressure that something is always undone, that you're always slightly behind, that there is never quite enough of the day left to do what you actually want. That feeling is real. But here's what's strange. It didn't exist for most of human history. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors woke up when their bodies told them to. They didn't have a morning alarm. They didn't have a boss. They didn't have a commute, a deadline, a performance review, or a mortgage payment. And yet the data, the actual archaeological and anthropological data, suggests they were, in measurable ways, doing better than you. Not in every way. Not in life expectancy. Not in infant mortality. Not in access to medicine. But in something that's become shockingly rare in the modern world: time, autonomy, rest, social connection, and a sense of purpose so deeply embedded in daily life that they never had to search for it. This isn't a fairy tale about the noble savage. That idea was discredited decades ago. This is something stranger and more unsettling than that. It's the story of what the data actually says, and why the researchers who found it didn't quite believe it at first. Let's start with the number that started everything. In 1963, an anthropologist named Richard Lee went to the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa to live with a group of hunter-gatherers called the Kung San. He wasn't there to romanticize them. He was there to measure. He tracked time. He counted calories. He recorded who worked, when, and how long. What he found shocked the field. The Kung San, one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, living in one of the harshest environments on the planet, worked an average of 15 to 20 hours per week to meet all of their survival needs. Food, water, shelter, tools, everything. 15 to 20 hours. The rest of their time was spent talking, resting, playing, sleeping, dancing, visiting, telling stories by firelight that stretched long past midnight. Lee published his findings. The academic world was skeptical. This had to be a mistake. These were people without agriculture, without writing, without metal tools. How could they have more leisure time than a citizen of an industrialized nation? So others went to check. They found the same thing. Marshall Solins, an economic anthropologist at the University of Chicago, reviewed Lee's data alongside dozens of other hunter-gatherer studies, and in 1972 published a paper that would become one of the most cited in anthropology. He called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. Not wealthy in stuff, wealthy in time. His argument was precise. Affluence, he said, can be achieved in two ways. You can have unlimited means to satisfy unlimited desires, or you can have few desires and enough means to satisfy them easily. Modern civilization chose the first path. Hunter-gatherers chose the second, and by that measure, they won. Now, the critics were ready. This sounds like a fantasy, they said. What about the years of famine? What about the violence? What about the weeks when the food simply didn't come? Fair. The picture is not uniformly rosy. Hunter-gatherer life had real suffering. Children died. Injuries were serious without medicine. Winters could be brutal. There were raids, feuds, and conflict between groups. But here is the thing the critics missed. Modern humans also have famine, violence, and suffering. And they add to it something hunter-gatherers largely did not have: chronic, low-grade stress. The relentless, cortisol-soaked anxiety of being behind, of owing something, of never quite keeping up. The anthropologist James Sussman spent 27 years studying the Jew/Honsi of the Kalahari, a group closely related to the Kung San, and found that before contact with farming and market economies, these communities had almost no concept of scarcity anxiety. They trusted the environment to provide because it had always provided. They didn't stockpile because stockpiling was unnecessary. If you had meat, you shared it. If your neighbor had meat, they shared it with you. The food supply was distributed through reciprocal obligation, not through individual saving. That trust reduced a specific kind of suffering that modern humans carry everywhere they go. Think about the last time you weren't thinking about money. Even people who have enough money think about money. The bills, the savings, the rent, the retirement account, the cost of the thing you want versus the cost of the thing you need. Hunter-gatherers, researchers consistently found, didn't have this. They had the psychological freedom of people who genuinely believed they would be okay. Now let's reconstruct a day. A real one. Imagine you are a woman in a hunter-gatherer band somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, roughly 50,000 years ago. Your group is about 25 to 30 people. You know all of them. You grew up with most of them. There is no such thing as a stranger in your daily life. You wake up when the light changes. The fire from last night is still faintly glowing. Someone else is already up. You don't rush. You sit for a while. You talk. Mid-morning, you and 3 other women walk out to gather. You're looking for tubers, roots, berries, leaves, the plant foods that make up the bulk of your diet. You've been walking these paths your whole life. You know which plants fruit when. You know where the water is. The knowledge lives in your body. 2 hours, maybe 3. Then you're done. You head back with enough food for the day. Maybe more. If there's extra, you share it without being asked. The afternoon is yours. You rest. You groom each other, which isn't just hygiene, it's intimacy. It's the physical language of trust. You watch the children play. You talk. About everything. About the person who annoyed you last week. About the dream you had. About the direction the herd moved. About a story your grandmother told. Polly Wiesner, an anthropologist at the University of Utah, recorded the conversations of the Ukung San over decades and found that their daytime conversations were overwhelmingly practical. Where to find food, how to solve a dispute. But after dark, when the fire was lit, something shifted. At night, around 80% of their conversations were stories, narratives, characters, events, moral puzzles, remembered ancestors, imagined futures. Wiesner called this firelight talk. She believed it was how hunter-gatherers built the kind of social knowledge that held their groups together. Stories were the technology of social cohesion. You know this technology. You are using it right now. You have always used it. It is not new. It is the oldest thing about you. By the time the sun is setting, the day is essentially over. You eat. The fire grows larger. The group comes together. Someone starts a rhythm. Someone begins to move. The Jew/Honzi danced several nights a week, not as a celebration, not as a special occasion. Just because dancing was what you did at night. It was how you processed the day, how you stayed connected, how you felt, in your body, that you were part of something. You go to sleep in a pile with the people you love, under a sky full of stars, with full bellies and no alarm. Was it hard sometimes? Yes. Was it dangerous? Yes. Was it perfect? No. But was it enough? More than enough. Now here is the twist. Everything changed with agriculture. About 12,000 years ago, in the region we now call the Fertile Crescent in what is modern-day Iraq and Syria, some human groups began to do something new. They began to plant seeds deliberately, to cultivate specific plants, to keep animals penned rather than hunting them wild. This is typically presented as one of the greatest advances in human history. And in some ways, it was. Agriculture allowed larger populations. It enabled cities, writing, science, and eventually the device you're watching this on. But for the individual human doing the work, the transition to farming was, by nearly every measurable biological and quality of life metric, a catastrophe. The skeletal evidence is damning. Researchers studying pre-agricultural versus post-agricultural skeletons from the same regions have found consistent patterns. The farmers were shorter. Their bones showed signs of chronic nutritional deficiency, including a condition called parotid hyperostosis, pitting and thinning of the skull caused by severe iron deficiency anemia. Their teeth were riddled with cavities from grain-based diets. They had repetitive stress injuries from grinding, planting, harvesting. They showed signs of tuberculosis and other diseases that spread when people began living in dense proximity to each other and their animals. The hunter-gatherers from the same time period? Taller, more robust, fewer dental problems, fewer signs of chronic stress. The anthropologist Mark Cohen spent years compiling these skeletal comparisons in his book Health and the Rise of Civilization and concluded that the transition to agriculture was, biologically speaking, a downgrade, not an upgrade. So why did it spread? This is one of the great mysteries of human history, and the honest answer is, researchers aren't entirely sure. Part of it may have been climate. The end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago, changed rainfall and temperature patterns dramatically. The wild plant and animal foods that had supported hunter-gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years became less reliable in certain regions. Part of it may have been population pressure. As groups grew, the mobile lifestyle of hunter-gatherers became harder to sustain. You need a lot of land per person. When land fills up, mobility shrinks. Part of it may have been that agriculture, once started, is self-reinforcing. You plant a crop, it grows, you eat it, your population grows, you need more food, you plant more crops. The system escalates. And once a group has a storable surplus and a farming infrastructure, it has something hunter-gatherers don't: the ability to support armies. Farming societies, over the long run, displaced hunter-gatherers not because farming was better for individuals, but because farming produced the conditions for conquest. Agriculture didn't spread because people chose it freely and found it superior. Agriculture spread because it was hard to stop once it started, and because farming-based societies had structural advantages in warfare. The individual human being was, in a sense, caught in a trap that most of your ancestors walked into slowly, generation by generation, without ever fully realizing it was happening. And here is where the story turns back to you. You live in the most materially wealthy civilization in human history. More food, more medicine, more shelter, more safety, more options than any human who has ever lived. And yet the rates of anxiety, depression, loneliness, and chronic stress in modern developed nations are, by any honest reckoning, extraordinarily high. The American Psychological Association has tracked stress levels in the United States for years. In survey after survey, a majority of Americans report stress that interferes with their daily functioning. The numbers for young adults are especially high. The World Health Organization estimates that depression is now the leading cause of disability worldwide. Something is wrong with this picture. The researchers who spend their careers studying hunter-gatherer societies don't claim that going back is possible or even desirable. They don't want you to abandon your life and go live in a forest. But they do believe the comparison reveals something important. Human beings evolved, over 300,000 years, for a particular kind of life. We evolved for movement, not gyms, actual daily walking and carrying over miles of terrain. We evolved for intermittent eating, not the constant availability of food. We evolved for small, tight-knit social groups where we knew everyone and were known by everyone, not for the anonymous mass of modern cities. We evolved for genuine rest and genuine sleep, not for the fractured, screen-lit 7 hours most people manage. We evolved for stories told in the dark, not for content consumed alone. And perhaps most importantly, we evolved for a sense of direct participation in our own survival. Every day in a hunter-gatherer band, your actions had immediate, tangible consequences. You went out and found food, or you didn't. You helped with the shelter, or you didn't. You contributed to the group, and the group took care of you. The feedback loop was real, immediate, and legible. In the modern world, that feedback loop is broken. You work for money that buys food that comes from somewhere invisible, grown by strangers, shipped by strangers, sold by strangers. Your actions are abstracted from their consequences by layers and layers of intermediary systems. You are, in a very real sense, disconnected from the basic logic of survival that shaped your nervous system. This isn't a reason for despair. It's a reason for understanding. The researchers who study hunter-gatherer well-being aren't making a political argument. They're offering a diagnostic. They're saying, look at what your nervous system was designed for. Look at what it gets, and see if that gap explains anything. Does it explain the anxiety? The loneliness? The difficulty sleeping? The sense that even with everything, something is missing? Maybe. Probably. At least in part. Because the thing your ancestors had, more than material comfort, more than safety, more than abundance, was this: they were never alone, they were never idle, and they were never confused about what they were for. They woke up when their bodies were ready, and they went to sleep knowing they had done enough. If there's one thing the science of hunter-gatherer life gives back to you, it's permission to stop equating busyness with worth. The most successful human beings to ever live, by the measure of how long our species spent living that way, were the ones who did what they needed to do, then rested, connected, and told stories in the dark. They didn't hustle. They didn't optimize. They didn't scale. They had enough. And they knew it. You still have that knowing somewhere inside you. It's not gone. It's just buried under 12,000 years of agriculture, industry, and the particular madness of the modern world. You wake up when your body is ready. For 300,000 years, that was the whole plan. And it worked.